That's really weird. We had a random CPU usage spike, maybe some background task. That shot CPU temps all the way up to about 70, 75 degrees Celsius. That was at 8% CPU utilization, so this is not gonna be good. This CPU right here is the Ryzen 9 5950X. It's a 16 core, 32 thread behemoth based on Zen 3 architecture, and it boasts some of the fastest single cores among consumer grade CPUs on the planet. Yeah, and this beast right here, this isn't really a beast. It's the Wraith Stealth stock cooler. This is actually the cooler you get in the 5600X's box. So yeah, of all four of the CPUs that were sent by AMD for review, only the cheapest and weakest of the four comes with a stock cooler, which kind of sucks, but look, if these higher end chips aren't gonna run on these stock coolers, what's the point of packaging them with one? So in this video, we're going to do a super weird thing, and we're going to pair the 5950X, I'm throwing my camera's autofocus off here, with a Wraith Stealth cooler. And I have absolutely no idea what's gonna happen. Crossing my fingers that it doesn't burn my house down. The Corsair 4000D Airflow. It's a timeless mid-tower with an emphasis on both cooling performance and efficiency. Cable management is a breeze thanks to plenty of room behind the motherboard tray and a dedicated routing channel. Fit up to 6 120mm fans in here or 4 140s along with accompanying radiators, and enjoy an included Type-C connector up front along with an easy to install tempered glass side panel. And best of all, it's a pretty phenomenal value. Learn more about the Corsair 4000D below. Now on to our test bed. This is an ASRock X570 Tai running the latest performance BIOS with the latest AGESA updates for Zen 3 processors, and for RAM we're going to be using a 16 gig kit of T-Force Zeus DDR4. Team Group is our product sponsor for this video, and you can learn more about these modules in the video description. So let's get the CPU installed, just like so. Lower the retention arm, and we'll remove the brackets so that we can install the stock cooler. Now I might receive a bit of backlash for using the stock thermal compound that's pre-applied to the back of the Wraith Stealth cooler here, but my rationale is this: if you're willing to compromise on cooling potential altogether by choosing to forego an aftermarket cooler, you probably don't have like premium thermal paste just laying around either. So that usually can cost upwards of 10-20 bucks for just 1 or 2 vials of it. So stock compound it is. This will probably, again, impact our performance a bit, but I mean, I think the cooler itself is a big enough concern to me that this isn't going to be a huge deal. So let's see what happens. All right, so everything's locked and loaded. I'm going to install the left side panel so that things are kind of indicative of real world performance, and then we will run a series of AIDA64 stress tests. We're going to see just how well the CPU does at stock. So we're going to enable XMP profiles, and then that's it, nothing else. We're not going to touch anything. We're gonna leave everything else on auto, kind of let the board do what it does. And then from there, we will maybe play with fan curves a bit. If we have any overclocking headroom, we'll take advantage of it as best we can, although I seriously doubt with a cooler this small we'll be able to overclock at all, or even tweak voltage. Maybe we can undervolt. Maybe we'll kind of shift gears and try undervolting the 5950X to see if we can, manage to get something decent out of this cooler if it doesn't do very well at stock. So here we go, crossing fingers. All right, so we're in the operating system. That's a good sign. Nothing's burned down yet. I have opened up AIDA64 Engineer to take a look at idle temps, because that's something that does matter. Obviously, it's not as big a deal as load temps, because load temps ultimately determine how far your CPU will push frequencies, but idle temps too can affect noise, like how loud your system is when it's not doing anything at all, when it's just sitting there. That could be pretty annoying if it's running fairly hot, and you can only imagine how much worse temperatures will get once you stress that CPU to any extent. So right now, it's really weird. We had a random CPU usage spike, maybe some background task. That shot CPU temps all the way up to about 70, 75 degrees Celsius. That was at 8% CPU utilization, so this is not gonna be good. All right, now these two temperatures represent the CPU itself, which might either be the package or the core. I'm not sure which one. It doesn't specify in AIDA64. And then CPU diode, and that is actually like an onboard temperature sensor there. So that's gonna be a fairly accurate reading. It's in green. You're gonna wanna keep track of these two, because when I stress the CPU, these temperatures, I'm assuming, are gonna go just straight up to probably 100 degrees. The system might actually throttle itself heavily and may even shut itself off in an attempt to save itself. So let's see what happens. I'm going to click start right over here, and let's see how this goes. 73. This is actually like way better than I thought it was going to be. Wow. Okay, let's check frequencies. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So right now, currently, I'm just going to read the first 4 core clocks. 4,000 megahertz, 3,500 megahertz, 3,600 megahertz, 3,700 megahertz. So well below 4 gigahertz across the board here, and I'm just looking at 8 cores. This is interesting. So it looks like, see, you can see our temperatures now shot up to about 86, 87 degrees Celsius. Traditionally, at least how it's been in the past, CPUs have just shot up to like 95 degrees Celsius, instantly thermal throttled up to like, 50% or more, and then sometimes even shut themselves off. Again, that's kind of a fail-safe. That's a last-ditch effort to spare the CPU from any more headache. But you can see we're at around 90 degrees Celsius now. That's pretty uncomfortable, especially for AMD. And our frequencies are now even lower. So Core 1 is at 31, well, it shot up now, about 3,500 megahertz. But a few other cores here have dropped below 3.5 gigahertz. So I saw a couple of them were at 3,100 megahertz, which is really freaking low, considering I think max turbo boost for this CPU is like 4.8 or 4.9 gigahertz. Now we've just passed the 6-minute mark for the stress test. We're, by the way, stressing the CPU, FPU, and cache, pretty much the entire chip. And a few other things that I've noticed, now that we're this deep into it, and this is not very long for a stress test. 6 minutes is nothing, even for an air cooler. This one we've probably already heat soaked, but a larger air cooler, maybe a dual tower air cooler, might not even be heat soaked after 5 or 6 minutes. So you want to run these for a bit longer so that you can get your true soaked temperatures. But in this case here, it's interesting that the CPU power, so at the package, we're only pulling, according to software, about 130 watts. That's less than what we were pulling from the 5900X stock with the Noctua NH212A, which is objectively a much better cooler than the stock Wraith Stealth cooler. So the chip throttled back power in an effort to spare itself from overheating, essentially. And what that also does effectively is cut your frequency down. So now, across the 8 cores I can see, we're at 3 gigahertz. I've actually seen lower than this. The minimum I've seen, even after resetting this, is 2.7, 2.8 gigahertz. So we're taking a huge performance hit for the sake of being able to run a cooler this cheap. And it's actually not even that loud. I have the shotgun mic hooked up, which is why audio for me is a little iffy right now. But I'm much louder than the system. I'm actually surprised the cooler stayed this quiet. So what it seems like it's doing by default is sparing us on the noise side of things, but that's obviously cutting drastically into our performance. Now I'm going to show you that by running a Cinebench test, and we're going to see how much worse our performance is now versus if we had stuck a 360mm AIO to it. And wow, so things seem to be moving pretty slow. Remember, we have 16 threads working to render this image in Cinebench R20, and I noticed that it wasn't much faster than my 5900X, that's a 12-core variant, running with the, again, the Noctua NH212A. So our score came out to 8,711, which is only 500 or 600 points higher than the highest score I was able to achieve at stock with the 5900X. That is pretty awful considering the CPU has 4 extra cores and 8 extra threads. Now I went back into IDA and I ran the stress test for about 20 minutes to see if I saw any change at all in temperature. But you can see we've literally flatlined at about 90 or 91 degrees Celsius. The CPU is not allowing itself to boost any higher than those set frequencies based on voltages that have been pulled back to preserve this temperature. So this is a self-preservation technique that Ryzen uses to keep itself from overheating and running too loud. Interestingly enough, my motherboard has not ramped up my air cooler fan at all. I'm pretty sure we're still at around 50% or so. So in your BIOS, if you have a fan curve set to run at around 50-60% of max RPM at 90 degrees Celsius, you're not going to hit that max fan RPM if you go above this, because the chip is not letting you go above this. So depending on how you set your fan curve, it's very conservative, then you're going to have this issue here where the CPU is throttling itself. Now, when I say throttle, I don't mean that it's like, you know, dangerous high temperatures. These are still really high, but this is not like, these aren't dangerous temperatures in the sense that your CPU is going to die in several minutes if you let it run for much longer. But what you can see here is that our frequencies have been pulled back to below 3 gigahertz, and our package power right around 130 watts or so. CPU V-core, the max for this entire thing has been less than 1.2 volts. And typically you're gonna see around 1.2, 1.25. Right now the CPU is only pulling 1 volt, which is, that's crazy low, but that's what it takes to get this CPU to function properly and to not exceed this 90 degrees Celsius barrier. Now I've got the camera and the shotgun mic pointed directly at the CPU cooler here. I'm about the same distance away from the microphone, so you can see how much louder my voice sounds compared to the cooler. Yeah, I'm tapping it there. The fan itself is making less noise than this tapping sound. So the system, whatever stock fan curve we're running here, again, this is all set to auto from the Taichi, is sacrificing CPU frequency in our 5950X for the sake of staying relatively quiet. I'm fairly surprised that this is this cool. Now, we're under 3 gigahertz all core for the 16 core chip, but we're quiet, so there's that. All right, and now to change things up a bit, I installed an H150i Elite Capellix from Corsair. It's a beastly 360mm AIO to show you kind of an ideal cooling solution for something like a 5950X. A 360mm AIO, I think, qualifies compared to the cheapest and probably super stupid cooling solution for a 5950X, that would be the stock Wraith Stealth cooler. Temperatures are significantly better. You can see we pretty much capped off here at about 64, 65 degrees. Although now that I've been looking at statistics, I feel like we're limited somewhere else. I feel like we're limited on the power side of things, which is weird because V-Core is an auto. We're not thermal throttling anymore. Everything else is set to auto. So I don't know what's going on there, but this probably has something to do with this video here, which we're still talking with AMD about, trying to get to the bottom of why we're experiencing subpar frequencies. Although you can see our frequencies across the board are still much better than they were with the cheap Wraith Stealth cooling solution. So that's kind of what I wanted to end this video with, to show you how much better it could be. And as a result of having higher frequencies under load, higher sustained frequencies, I should say, we're gonna get much better Cinebench results. This will also be reflected in games. I went ahead and tested Shadow of the Tomb Raider. In both scenarios, you can see there's a huge difference in our averages, and that's because the CPU was, again, being throttled down severely in the Wraith Stealth case. So this is not something that you can just see played out in CPU synthetics. It also will affect your games. So if you have a Ryzen CPU, even an Intel CPU, and your cooling solution is not beefy enough, just that cooler alone could affect gaming performance. And that's why it's important that you use a cooler that more or less falls in line with your CPU's TDP. So I hope this video has at least satisfied your morbid curiosity. Maybe you learned a thing or two. Definitely interesting to see how AMD behaved when it was thermally limited. Interested to see how the power delivery, the power allocation scaled according to how much thermal headroom was available. And also interesting to note that the cooler itself wasn't running very loud while the CPU was at around like 90 degrees Celsius. So the system at stock in auto settings, without me tweaking anything manually, is doing some interesting things. This stuff that I'm not used to seeing happen. Some of these newer platforms are just kind of taking control and trying to keep it all under control, keep your house from burning down. So if you guys thought this was cool, be sure to comment down below. Let me know what you think about it and what you want to see experimented with next. 5950X is awesome. You can check out the CPU along with the AIO, the case. All of our testing equipment is going to be linked down below. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.